on telling your story during COVID-19 with Susan Pufflia. I'm Julie Clark, Vice President of Nonprofit Engagement with Business Volunteers Unlimited, and we are so pleased to partner with Community Foundation of Lorain County for this fantastic session. BVU serves as the bridge between the business and nonprofit communities in Northeast Ohio, and we work to strengthen nonprofits through the referral of board members, volunteers, as well as through our consulting and education services. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we go any further. If you're like us, you've been on a lot of webinars the past few months, so these are gentle reminders for all of us. You are all on mute, so no worries about kids, dogs, or lawnmowers. If you're able to, please turn your video on so we can see your faces and actively engage with each other throughout the session. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we'll share the recording and slides with you all in the next few days. We encourage you to share them with other staff and board members at your organizations. We invite you to ask questions using the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be monitoring that during the webinar, and Susan will try to answer as many questions as she can during the session today. And lastly, feel free to adjust your view options so that it works for you. From the drop-down menu at the top, you can switch your view so you can see Susan's PowerPoint and her smiling face side by side during our presentation. Thanks again for being here with us. And now let me turn it over to Britt Lovett, Marketing and Communications Officer from Community Foundation of Lorain County. Britt?
Thanks, Julie. Good morning, everyone. We are so delighted to have you join us this morning for our next installment of our webinar seminar series that we've been doing with BVU, and all of them have been great. And just like you've done before, we're going to send a survey at the end so we can get some feedback. And that feedback is crucial just because, like this, we're able to tailor whatever we offer from what you guys would like to see. And so I have the honor of introducing Susan, who I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, who has been working in the marketing communication field for over 30 years. She has worked with local nonprofits, corporations, places all over the nation and international. So you are in for a delight today with Susan. So Susan, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Britt. I'm really happy to be, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to see so much interest in this topic. It happens to be one of my favorites, and as organizations like yours go through the course of the day, there's so many things to think about that oftentimes marketing and your brand get overlooked. And the reality is that they are critical to the success of your organizations. You know that, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And I really applaud you for recognizing too that in these changing times, it's going to have an impact on your brands, because I couldn't be more true today than ever before. The landscape has changed. We're dealing with very different times, and understanding what the expectations are can be a little bit challenging for organizations. I choose to see it as an opportunity to engage with new audiences, to engage with your current audiences in new ways, and to deepen the connections that we have with the people that are important to our organizations. And the reality is that people feel more isolated today probably than ever before. And we see that in all kinds of statistics that are splashed over the news every single day. So the opportunity to give people a way to connect with their communities and in their communities in a very powerful and meaningful way, which is what all of your organizations do, is something that is a refreshing change for folks. So let's just dig in here. I'm going to get my slides up here for you. Bear with me one moment. Okay, here we go. Oh, and just a reminder, as Julie said, I'm happy to take questions. We ask that you put them in chat, and we'll deal with them all at the end, or at least as many of them as we can at the end. So we know that we are in unprecedented times. And the question is, what does this mean for your brand? And really, to answer this question, we have to start by looking at the environment in which your brands exist. Aside from the news of the day, we are inundated by more information, more content, more options than ever before. And it's difficult for people to sort through everything that bombards us every single day and know what to pay attention to. And whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, we are really sorting through the information and making choices about what we allow to enter into our lives, our brains, our state of mind, our state of being, and so forth. And all of this content that's coming in is changing our expectations. And sometimes those expectations change seemingly overnight without us even noticing the evolution. So what you support, what you don't support, what you share, what you don't share, all of this is critical and is going to prompt a response from people. And it may be that they ignore what you're sending out. It might be that they engage in the way that you want them to, or it also might be that they speak out against your organizations, which is certainly something that you don't want to have happen as well. So knowing that this is the environment that exists is essential when you start thinking about your brand and where you should be positioning your brand, how you should be positioning your brand. So during unprecedented times like these, it's really critical to assess your brand and what it stands for and how you are connecting with these people that matter to you, how it fits in the world around you, how your mission aligns, who your stakeholders are, what's important to them, where they're getting their information, how they're getting their information, what kind of information they even want to be receiving. It's essential to view the world through the eyes of the people that are important to you and to ensure that your story fits in with the world that they see and the world that they're dealing with. So remember that there are a number of truths about brands that are important to keep in mind. First and foremost, you don't exist in a bubble. Whether we like to think we do or not, the reality is everything around the world is impacting how people are viewing your brand and whether or not your brand messaging is even getting through. The other thing that is essential to keep in mind is if you are not actively managing your brand, don't mistake the fact that it is being managed. It's just being managed by others. So what people see, how they think about your organization, their perceptions, their impressions, all of that is being formed, but you may not actively be having a role in that. And that is probably the biggest mistake that any organization can make. And we'll talk about how you can ensure that you're not making that mistake. And then finally, don't forget that people's perceptions are your reality. What people think of your organization, their impressions of your organization, whether it's what you want them to know and think or not, that's the world that exists for you, which is why it's so essential to be actively managing your brand and controlling the information that you're putting out, thinking about who you are connecting with, how you are connecting with individuals and organizations, so that people have the impression of your organization that you want them to have. Otherwise, not only might you not be relevant to them, but you might be missing the opportunity to really further your cause in a way with people that could be powerful advocates and ambassadors on your behalf. So when we think about brands and the choices and decisions people make, again, we're making thousands, hundreds of thousands of decisions every single day, many of them unconsciously. How does that happen? Well, I'm not going to go into all of the science behind it, but there really is a lot of science behind it because our brains have to find a way to sort through all of the information. And one thing that hasn't changed is that there is what drives people's decisions. And Simon Sinek, if you're not familiar with him, he is a leading thinker and author about leadership and business and a host of other topics. If you aren't familiar with his work, I strongly urge you to check him out. And the best place to start is he did a TED Talk a number of years ago called Start With Why. And this is really, I think, the essence of how people make decisions about the organizations that they pay attention to. He's the one that really articulated this concept of why, if you're familiar with that. And it's the primary driver or the rationale behind the decisions, connections, and passions that really propel people. So at first blush, this quote from him may come across as very business focused, but don't let the literal translation of the word buy throw you off, because buy can mean anything. It could be believe, it could be purchase, it could be donate, it could be any number of things. And this concept applies to nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations alike. So again, our decisions, whether we're conscious or cognizant of them or not, they're driven by how we perceive people, how we perceive organizations, and how we perceive the brands that represent those people and organizations. And it's not just the qualities, the features, the benefits, the services that are offered, but it's really the value to us, the value that they make to our communities, the value that they provide to the world, and it's our perception of that value that is going to determine whether or not we're going to engage with them. It's why they do what they do. That's the whole concept and the driver behind whether or not we're going to connect. That's what really matters more than anything else. So the challenge or the opportunity, if you're an optimist like me, is to be able to answer this question of why for your brand. Why does your brand exist? Why do you do what you do? Why should anyone care about what you do? You have to think about, again, through the eyes of the people that you're trying to reach, what is going to get them to care, to consider your organization, and to connect with it in a way that you hope that they will. Telling your story during times like these really begins with determining the relevance of your brand. How is it meaningful in the new construct that we're all dealing with? The good news is that in general, nonprofit organizations have a built-in purpose, right? You're all doing amazing work every single day for the good of the community. You should be able to answer all of these questions that you see here from the place of your purpose that's already there and built in. So if we want to take a closer look at all of these different areas, there are really 4 steps that you should be taking to navigate this changing environment and to ensure that your brand is not only able to weather, but even to thrive within this changing climate. So we'll take a look at each of these individually and the actions that you can take. Some you can put in place today. My hope is that you walk away from this session today with a brain full of ideas, but with at least a few actionable things that you can start doing immediately. The moment you step off this webinar, there are things that you should be able to put into place to do on behalf of your brand. Others will require more work and introspection, and they'll be just as important in the long term. But ultimately, what will happen is if you do start down this path and you do start actively managing your brand and becoming more engaged with the people that matter to you, your brand will be relevant and meaningful to people today, but also well poised for the future. So let's take a look at each of these 4 steps. Starting with evaluating your brand. So when was the last time any of you thought about your brand? My guess is it's probably been a while. Or maybe when you saw this seminar coming up, you decided, okay, I need to sign up and get some tips. That's good. The fact that you're here is important. But what I'm talking about is really, really thought about it. Whether you have or not, it's time to assess, to reassess where you stand. How have the people that you serve changed? They have. Remember, the world around us is different, so every single one of us has evolved in some way. How are their needs different? The people that you serve, but the people that you want to help you serve those people as well. If you don't know, it's time to ask them. An amazing thing happens when you ask people what they think about your organizations, what they need, what they want from your organizations. They will tell you. All you have to do is ask. And this doesn't have to be big, heady, expensive research. Sometimes it's a series of phone calls. It's a simple survey, an internet survey, a questionnaire you can give someone after an interaction with your organization. You all have email lists, you all have databases. Use those databases, those email lists, to ask people for feedback about your organization. Same goes with donors, with your volunteers, other stakeholders, your employees even. Find out what's driving them, how their needs have changed, their interests have changed, even where they're getting their information. Many people think it's only traditional news. Others think it's only social media. The reality is it's a mixed bag. And today, with so much information being thrown at us, people are looking for opportunities to get the story straight from the horse's mouth, if you will, but also to get it through aggregators. So how are you ensuring that your messaging, your story is getting in front of people when you want it to, where you want it to, how you want it to, and in the way that you want it to? It's about getting all of those things right to ensure that they're going to connect. And if you don't even know how they want their information or what they need from you, you're going to miss the mark, or at least you'll miss the opportunity to really, really hit the mark. Secondly, how's the pandemic and the other changes in the world impacted your focus or the services that you provide? It's not unusual for us to see needs and respond to address those needs. Are you dealing with mission creep? Has your mission broadened because it needed to, because it had to? Does your mission today still align with the direction of your organization? Or vice versa? Is the direction that you're headed still in alignment with the mission and the purpose of your organization? You have to take time to step back and think about those things, because it is going to impact your brand, and not just what you're doing, but how you're engaging with people and whether or not people are going to choose to pay attention to your organization. What about your competition? Have you looked at your competition lately? Your peers, do they still exist? Have they evolved? How have they evolved? Are there opportunities for new partnerships that maybe you didn't have in the past? Those are things to be thinking about as well, because what's happening in the competitive landscape is also going to impact the world in which your brand exists. Make sure that you're taking a look at these things on a regular basis. And again, you don't have to do expensive, extensive research. Some simple assessments can really help you understand what's going on around you, and look at then how your brand fits into this new world and this new narrative. It may be that there's absolutely nothing you have to do differently, but I would suspect there are even small tweaks that you can make to how you're telling your brand story that will have a very powerful impact. So make sure you're gathering balanced, objective intelligence to inform your thinking and make rational and conscious decisions. Don't just let the tide move your organization. Make sure you're steering through the waters that are changing. Second step, know your brand. So once you understand and you've done some evaluation and you really get a sense of what is happening in the world around you that your brand exists in, it's really important to understand that people are interested in why you do what you do. And before you can even tell your story, you have to understand what your brand stands for. So again, this is really your why. And you really need to take a very close look at the purpose of your organization and how you're explaining what it is you believe in, why you believe in it. That's what people are going to connect with. How would the world be different if your organization ceased to exist? Have any of you asked that question? It's a really powerful one to answer. And if you think about that, then you can also think about that critical gap that you fill in the world, the purpose that you serve, that perhaps no other organization is in a position to serve. How is your brand different than others that are out there? How are you differentiated? How are you telling your story in a way that demonstrates how you're different and the vital impact that you make? Do people important to your organization understand all of this about your organization? Again, their perceptions are your reality. And this little graphic that you see on the screen here is an important one to think about. The overlap between what you intend with your brand and what people perceive about your brand, that should be right on point. It's not always going to be, but if the two are radically different, then you are missing a huge opportunity for people to connect with your brand. Because if they don't understand it, or if their perceptions of who you are, what you do, why you do what you do are very different from the reality, then they're going to make other choices. Remember, there are thousands of choices we can make. There are hundreds and hundreds of nonprofit organizations in Lorain County. There are thousands of them in Northeast Ohio. So people want to do good. People want to make an impact. If you aren't connecting with them, and if they don't perceive your organization in the way that you want to, you may be missing an opportunity to make that connection and have that value to your organization. So ask these kinds of questions and be honest about the answers. I think it's important to recognize that, in business, you talk about competitive advantage. In fact, Jack Welch once famously said, if you can't articulate your competitive advantage, don't bother to compete. Don't even bother to show up. Now, whatever you might think about Jack Welch or not, the reality is the man knew something about competition. And it's important to understand what your brand is all about and how it's different from others. It's not just you existing in what you think is a bubble, because remember, everything in the world around you is impacting the perceptions that people have of your brand. Now, this might be a harsh view, but think about it. Having a brand that is perceived as valuable really begins with you being able to understand and articulate what's unique about the value that your brand provides. Third step, tell your story. When you understand the changes impacting your brand and you understand the value of your brand, it's a lot easier to share a story that people are going to care about. So again, you have to be actively managing your brand every single day. I hope you wake up each morning and think, what am I going to do for my brand today? Sometimes it's bigger and bolder, sometimes it's smaller, but every single day you should be doing something. And think about it this way. Every single interaction people have with your organization represents your brand. Every single interaction you have, your staff has, your board members have, the people that you serve, your volunteers, etc. Every single interaction that they have with your organization and then could have with others represent your brand. That can be a very powerful network if you tap into it and actively tell your story in a way that is going to help people understand and perceive your organization in the way that you want them to. So think about how you position your brand, how you connect people with your brand, and how you're doing so in a way to further your objectives. And objectives meaning your organizational objectives, your strategic objectives, but every communication, every single interaction you have should be driven by a communications objective. What do you hope to get out of that interaction? What do you hope people learn, understand, or do as a result of interacting with your brand and your messaging in that particular moment? So before you speak, post, announce something, meet with people, make sure you're thinking about why you are doing it, how it supports your brand, and what you want to achieve as a result. What action do you want people to take as a result? When you are talking with people, and by talking I mean broadly, when you're communicating on behalf of your brand, make sure you speak in their terms. Don't use your jargon. Don't get mired in data points. Yes, data is important, but what do we really care about? We care about human stories. It's the impact of what you're doing that is really what people want to know. And in a world where we're facing so much negative news every single day, there's a lot of heavy challenges that our world is facing. People want something that's refreshing and that's uplifting, that gives hope. How can you provide hope through the work that you do? How can you focus and help people understand the impact that you're making in our community? And the good, really, that your organization does. So speak in their terms. Talk about the impact that you make. Make it real. Introduce them to the people that you're helping, if you can. Introduce them to the results that it has, how people's lives are changing because of the vital role that your organization fills. Most importantly, though, make it authentic. And it's got to be real and true to your brand, and be consistent in what you say. And also how you act, right? How your people act when they come in contact with others. And that's the practices of your organization, the protocols, your partners. Do you have consistency in your mission and your purpose that aligns with the things that are important in the world today? Make sure you're being diverse and inclusive and sensitive in your communications, and take hard looks at your board. Is your board diverse and representing a variety of points of view and representing the community and the people that you serve? Are your stakeholders represented? All of these things are critical to be thinking about, because these are points on which people are judging your organization. And you don't necessarily have to be talking about these things proactively, but make sure as part of the assessment that you're doing on your brand, you are looking at all of this. Because again, every single interaction that you have, every opportunity that people have to learn more about your organization, it's got to be consistent if it's going to impact the brand in a way and impact their perceptions of the brand, so that they think of you in the way that you hope that they will. Final step, look for ways to extend your story. Look for ways to make your communications work harder for your brands. Tell people what you need and why you need it, and ask them to help. And then share the stories of them helping and the impact that they make. Talk about or look for ways to make it personal. There's a young woman who, by the name of Mallory Brown, who started a nonprofit a number of years ago, where she wanted to do something in communities. After her post-college tour of the world, she recognized that there were a lot of communities where, people just didn't have the basic needs. Now, we know this intuitively, but one of the things that she did that was incredibly powerful was she made it personal when people were donating, and she connected the people who donated to the people who received. So one of the things that she did was to provide clean, basic, but colorful t-shirts to kids in developing countries, in really underserved populations and communities. And when she would go on her runs and drop off the t-shirts, she would shoot videos that she would then send, just handheld from her iPhone, that she would then send out to her donors. Hey, so-and-so, I'm here delivering the t-shirts that you made possible. Connections like that are what are going to fuel people to really believe in your organization and recognize the good that you're doing, because it connects with us as humans. Now, that may not be possible for the nature of the work that you do, but there are ways that you can find to connect in with people and show them the impact that they're making because of the impact that they enable you to make. Don't forget to tap into your board, your volunteers, your employees, your community. Ask all these people to be advocates and ambassadors on behalf of your brand. Help them understand what it is you want people to know, and then ask them to share your story. But make sure you make it easy for them to do so. Give them messages. Give your board things that they can email out to others, whether they're letters or visuals or social media posts, whatever it might be. Make sure that you are making it as easy as possible for people to share the story that you want them to share in a way that's personal for them. Also, think about fresh ways that you can view your brand and look at how you can help people see it in a different light and the impact that the organization makes. You've heard me say that a lot. It's all about impact. It's all about the human side of the work that you're doing. That's what people really care about, because that's what we understand. That shows why you do what you do. And it also will help you break through the clutter, because when we see a story about people, it helps us understand that there are those who need help in our communities. It makes it real for us. It puts it front and center. But again, it doesn't have to be in a heavy way. Certainly, you look at commercials, for example, the ASPCA with their commercials of the animals in cages, and they're heart-wrenching. They're absolutely heart-wrenching. But there are also powerful ways to tell the story about animals in need or people in need in our communities, and do so in a more hopeful way that people will connect with. So there's a balance that you need to strike and know what is right for your brand. Another thing to think about is there are always trending stories. There are always trending things happening on social media. And today, perhaps more than ever, we're seeing this. Don't just jump on something because it's popular. Resist that urge. I, in fact, would encourage you to really understand the root of these trends that are trending. Trends that are trending. Boy, that's very eloquent there. But really look at the root of what's going on, because sometimes what is perceived is not what something is really all about. And there have been many examples recently. If you saw, for example, any of the black and white photos that a lot of women were posting and being encouraged to post on social media, there was some backlash around some of that. Now, I happen to believe celebrating strength in people, in women, in children, in whomever, in this case, celebrating strength in women is a good thing. But many people didn't know where all of that started. And if you go back and you look at where that all started, it really started with women speaking out against honor killings that were happening in Turkey to young women. And that's a very, very important, heavy topic. But over time, it evolved into something else. And some would say it got diluted. And those who were behind the original intent of all of this were upset because they felt like their message was lost. So there are two cautions here. One is know who you're partnering with and what those organizations and individuals stand for. Because what may be perceived by people is not really what those organizations or individuals are all about. And secondly, if you have the opportunity where you are starting something that's viral on behalf of your organization, try to do everything you can to make sure that the message of your organization stays connected to the trend that takes off. Several years ago, ALS was behind the ice water challenge. Remember the water challenge where people were dumping buckets and ice cubes and things on their heads? Most people had no idea why they were doing it. It was actually a fundraiser for ALS. And initially, it was fantastic and people raised a ton of money. Then it became diluted in something else. So if you are fortunate to be behind something that goes viral, find the opportunities, push for people to keep the opportunities to connect that back to your message and your cause, whether it's through the hashtags that you use, the messages that you connect with it, the stories that you interject, how you celebrate what people are doing. Make sure that your message doesn't get lost as your story gets more and more legs. Now, I'm not saying don't speak up if you have something to say. By all means do. Just do so wisely, thoughtfully. Make sure that whatever you're doing, again, aligns back with your brand, because everything you do, say, all of that is going to impact how people perceive your organization. And if you aren't actively managing it, it's going to be managed, but not in a way that's going to serve your purposes. And I want to give you one big caution here as well to be thinking about, and that is nothing is private and nothing is off the record. If you say it, it could be filmed. If you post it, it can be shared. So just keep in mind, even if you're posting within a small internal group, whatever it might be, always be aware that messaging is going to be shared, whether you want it to or not. And it can reflect on your organization. So, you know, if we think we're saying things in private to people that are within our inner circle that are different from our organizations, what our organizations believe, those are going to reflect back on the organization. If you have a personal social media account, that is going to reflect on your organization as well, what you say and do there. We've seen numerous examples of people who get in trouble for things that they should, maybe some people might think they shouldn't, but others who get in trouble for things that they really should get in trouble with. And it can mean loss of job, but more importantly for your organizations, it can mean loss of trust in your organization. And the last thing you want to do is compromise the trust that people have in your organizations, because then that compromises your ability to achieve your purpose, to do the good work that you do. So just remember, nothing is private and nothing is off the record. And if you keep that in mind, if you say it, if you do it, you'll be fine. So a few final thoughts. People are searching for perfection, but the reality is it's not about perfection. It's about progress. We are all improving. We are all evolving. We are all learning new things every single day. And you need to make sure that you keep in mind, you can't ever be perfect. And you'll never be perfect at trying to be perfect. There are no right or wrong answers. And if you keep the brand truths in mind and be clear, be consistent, be inclusive, be sensitive, be real, focus on the impact that your organizations make more so than just the services and the offerings that you have, that's what people will connect with. But most important, know your brand, know what you're all about, stand for something and be true to what you stand for, and make sure that every decision that you make, every communication that you have with people is going to reinforce what your brand is all about. But don't forget, we're still all human beings at the end of the day. And in the words of the genius Maya Angelou, it's all about how we make people feel. And if your brand makes people feel something, whether it's empowered, whether it's interested, whether it's some sort of a connection that you're able to make with people on an emotional level about the work that you're doing, the people that you're serving, and the way you are benefiting your communities, that's what people will remember. At the end of the day, they'll forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And if your brand stands for something that makes people feel, and it's something that they connect with, they will support it. And even in these very, very challenging times, you'll be able to weather whatever storms come your way. You'll be able to weather whatever changes come your way, and your brand will be stronger for it. And with that, thank you. If you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them now.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much. Really, really fantastic. We do have a couple questions that have come in, and we invite you to please ask more through the chat function. You talked about stakeholder perceptions and your brand intentions and where there might not be alignment. Can you give an example of where there's not, where there might not be alignment?
Sure, I can. And it comes down to, do you know what people think of your organization? And again, if you haven't asked them, you won't know. But sometimes we think organizations stand for something that perhaps they don't stand for, or they are, their brands represent something that might be different. So if you think about, for example, I'll use one, well, let me give you one that actually is in alignment. So the Salvation Army, I think, does a very, very good job of helping people understand what that organization is all about. And all of the decisions that it makes are through the lens of the purpose of that organization. So how they help people in our community. It's not just, the bell ringers that we all see at the holidays, but when they talk about how they fit into the world. If you go to their website today, for example, and you look at their statements on equality, you'll see that it's still very much in line with the faith foundation that the Salvation Army has. Now, it's not that they're preaching heavy-duty faith at people, but they simply say that based on our founding and these Christian principles upon which we are founded, this is how we approach the world. This is what we've always done when it comes to equality, and this is what we always will do when it comes to equality. And I think that's a very good example of an organization that has that alignment. Other organizations where maybe there's a disconnect, what you will see is that they are missing the opportunity to be the choice that people make every time. And it's harder to give an example where there isn't alignment than those where there is alignment. But the key is, for your organizations, think about what you want people to know. If someone was going to describe your organization to another individual, what would you want them to say about it? And if they aren't saying those things that you want them to, you need to understand what they are saying, and you need to change the narrative. You need to change what they know and understand. And that's where telling your story comes into play. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. That's great. Someone else had a question about template. Is there something that you recommend as a starting point for an organization to evaluate or reevaluate their brand?
Absolutely. First and foremost, start with your mission, start with your strategic objectives, and make sure that how you are presenting your brand aligns with those. And make sure that when you are communicating with people, you are communicating about the impact that you are making toward those objectives. So if your mission is about making sure every child has an opportunity at a good education, how are you doing that? What kind of an impact are you having? Can you feature the stories of the kids and what they do and how they go on from getting that good, solid educational start in life to, following them through at some point, whether it's moving on to higher levels of education? And I don't necessarily mean graduating from college. I mean, are you dealing with kids who maybe dropped out before they even got to high school? And are those kids now entering into high school and then moving beyond high school into college or trades or what have you. But if you first take a look at your mission, your strategic objectives, and then align your communications to talk about what you're doing there, that's going to be an important place to start. Secondly, be very judicious in any messaging that you are putting out, any stories that you are sharing, whether it is interviews that your people are giving with the media, again, interactions that you have directly with people, emails, newsletters, social media. Look for consistency. Make sure you are saying the things that you want people to know about your organization in a way that's going to be relevant to them. And in order to do that, you have to know what's relevant to them. So try to get some input from people outside the organization to understand, what do they want to hear from you? Ask your donors. That is probably the biggest place that organizations overlook, is to ask people, tell us about us. What is it about us that is powerful to you? What more do you want to know or hear about from us? So those three things would be the first place to start. Know what you stand for, be consistent in what you're talking about, and understand what people want to know and hear and what they think is special about your organization. Because sometimes what others think about our organizations are things that we don't even know about. We take for granted. Oftentimes, your people matter far more. Your people, meaning your staff, matter far more to the people that you serve and the communities that you serve than you might give them credit for. And by that, I mean the way that they interact with people. You might think, oh, this is just in our DNA. This is just who we are. We take that for granted. But to people outside an organization, that can go a very, very long way.
Great. You talked about nothing is private, nothing is off the record, and having that be kind of your mantra and your approach to any communication that you might have. Is this something that nonprofits should be sharing with board members, should be sharing with staff? How might you approach that?
Absolutely, because everyone who touches your organization represents your brand. And you really have to think about what guidelines and protocols and practices you want to have in place, and be prepared if something does happen. There have been stories in the news with United Way of Summit and Medina recently, where there have been issues with staff and board members that have hit the news. And, how are those things? How would you handle those things? And making sure people understand that if they believe in your organization, yes, they have to be true to themselves, but if they believe in your organization, they need to understand that they too and their actions are representations of your organization and your brand. Start first with your staff and make sure that you have social media protocols and guidelines in place. Let them know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And be clear with them about that, and be clear about the consequences, because you need to think through all of that. With your board, it's the same. And when you are asking people to speak on your behalf, arm them with the information that you want them to share. Don't just let them, go off on their own. Give them guidelines and suggested messages and potential visuals even that they can share. If you make it easy for them, they're more likely to share the information that you want them to. But I think it's always a good reminder for anyone connected to your organization to keep in mind that though we think we may be living in our safe, secure world online, we aren't. And once it's out there for good. And there's no pulling it back. So if people really care about your organization and are committed to your organization, they need to recognize that having a role with your organization comes with certain responsibilities, and how they conduct themselves online is just as important to how your brand presents itself online.
Do you have a template for social media guidelines?
I certainly have used them with my clients in the past. There are a lot of them that exist that you can Google. I'm happy to. I mean, that's a seminar that we could do, just on social media. Quite frankly, on the do's and don'ts of navigating what I think of as the wild west of media today. But the best practices are really, if you don't want to see it, if you don't want it to come back at you, don't put it out there. And don't ever, ever post something in the heat of the moment. Try not to be reactionary. Be thoughtful in what you're doing, and always stop, take a breath, and ask, does this further my organization's objectives? And if you encourage your staffs, your board members to think the same, then, and to use that as a sort of a checkpoint before posting, then hopefully that will be a barrier that will alleviate a lot of problems. But I mean, certainly, yes, there are many guidelines that are out there and protocols that you can put in place. Having a written policy is beneficial. There are many organizations that post some of these things publicly for people to see. There are books that you can read and so forth. And as I said, we could even consider whether or not it's appropriate to do another session specifically on the do's and don'ts of social media and how to put together a policy that's right for each organization.
Great. A couple more questions. When telling your story, is video the best way to reach people, or is it email or mail messaging, or try to go across the board?
Well, it frankly would be a combination of all of the above. Visuals are always much more impactful than the written word. And I'm a writer, and and as powerful as I like to think my words might be, visuals really, really speak to people. So whether it's video or whether it's photography, you always want to be looking for ways to leverage those. They tell a story and capture things that the written word alone cannot. Having said that, what's most important is to know how people want to get information from you. So there's two different things that we're talking about here. One is the channel. So is it email? Is it social media? Is it traditional media? Is it something that you're printing and sending in the mail? The channel is one thing. How you present the story, whether you use images, video, or words, that's the other piece. And it's the combination that you need to be thinking about. I would suspect that most people who are connected to your organizations are going to be interested in a mix. Make sure that even within that mix, there is consistency across what you're saying. When I do media training with individuals to prepare them to do interviews, one of the things that I've done in the past is working with celebrity spokespeople or corporate CEOs, and I always tell them consistency is essential. You may feel like you are becoming a broken record, saying the same thing over and over and over and over again, even using the same exact words. But the reality is, it might be the first time someone's hearing it or seeing it. And if you aren't saying it in a way that is going to connect to your brand and further your brand message and further the objectives of your organization, get people to care, connect, and act, then you're going to miss that opportunity. So you want to have consistency in the message, regardless of the channel and regardless of the medium that you might be using to share that information. But first and foremost, visuals are always impactful. And I will say one thing about video: it does not have to be beautifully produced video every single time. Those are expensive. I realize they are expensive to do, and it may or may not be the right choice for your organization. You may want to have kind of a brand anthem type of a video, right? A short video that is nicely done, that really demonstrates what your organization is all about. But you can achieve that using still photography and words that are put together with a little bit of music in a powerful way. The other thing is, remember the Mallory Brown videos that I told you about? That was something with her literally holding out her iPhone, standing, in a community in Africa, showing a whole bunch of kids in colorful t-shirts behind her that was 30 seconds long, saying thank you to a donor and showing the impact that had. So use a mix of things. Just try to make sure, again, it's consistent and appropriate for your brand.
Great. And that leads really nicely into the very last question that we got, which is, do you have any capacity recommendation for organizations that may have very small staff that may or may not include a marketing person? I mean, how do you even tackle this if it's the chief executive who's taking this on and, very limited staff capacity?
Well, and I actually meant to acknowledge that some of you today may have more or less experience with marketing and managing your brands, and some of you may have more or less staff that can do that. It has to be someone's responsibility. And even if you don't have a marketing person on staff, it can become the responsibility in some way of everyone in your organization. Remember, everybody connected to your organization is a representative of the organization. They do represent your brand, but they also have the capacity to be an advocate or an ambassador on behalf of your brand. So if you don't have the capacity to have somebody full-time doing this, and frankly, even if you do have a marketing person, it's a big full-time job for one person. If you have marketing people, ask them. They will tell you. If you're marketing people here, you know what I'm talking about. But the reality is, if you ask people to share on your behalf, you equip them with the tools to do so, then it becomes an exponential impact, right? Because it's me telling you, and these networks grow. So that is one aspect to think about. The other thing is, there's a lot that you can do, but the reality is you can't do everything. So you have to prioritize and you have to pick and choose what is most important. If you are doing one thing every day to consciously manage your brand, to actively manage your brand, to help people understand what your organization is all about, that's a place to start. And that one thing could be waking up in the morning and considering, what is it I should be talking about today? How am I going to make sure people understand what my organization is about? Who am I going to ask what they think of the organization, what they need from the organization, how we can help them better understand so they're going to want to engage? Even simple things like that, small things like that, have a big impact, because if you take that feedback in and then you apply it to what you're doing the next time, it'll make your brand and your brand communications all the more powerful. But if you think about having a plan for what you're going to do and how you're going to manage your brand, that will help. You've got a million things to do every day. And we all deal with what Stephen Covey calls the tyranny of the urgent, right? You may have your to-do list and your plan for what you're going to sit down and do every day. And I would hazard to guess, if you're like most people, at the end of the day, you look back at that and maybe you checked a couple of things off, if you're lucky, but you certainly didn't check them all off. So as we're dealing with all of these fires that are going to be coming up, and some are bigger, some are smaller, but someone needs something from you. As you're dealing with all of this, try to go in to every day, every week, every month with a specific plan of something you can do that is going to help you manage, leverage your brand, tell your story in a way that will impact others. And don't beat yourself up if you feel like you're not making progress, because if you're just doing these small things every day, they will add up to the big things. But do make time for the big things. Gather your staff together, gather outsiders together to talk about your brand, to talk about the organization, and make sure you know where you are today, how you fit in the world today, and where you want to be in the future.
Susan, thank you so much. This is Cindy Andrews. I'm just so delighted that you were able to just share such powerful thoughts with all of our listeners today and those that will be listening at a later time. I really wanted to thank BVU as well. And for those of you that don't know, these series really are part of the strategic plan of your Community Foundation of Lorain County. How do we continue to support, but also strengthen our local nonprofits and really create a thriving Lorain County? So we thank you for joining us. We thank you for your discussion. And before I turn it over to Julie, just another quick commercial. We have Connect to a Cause coming up September 17th. Our 30-day countdown begins on Monday. And we're so excited that so many of you have decided to join us in telling your story as part of Connecting to a Cause here in Lorain County. Other Community Foundation news: we have a Women's Fund grant cycle that presently is live on our website, peoplewhocare.org. But we also have a Women's Fund event coming up on August 27th, and that's at Partners there in Avon Lake area. And as so many of you continue and hear about the digital divide in our community and how we can support those students more, PCs for People will be there with a technology drive. And so please feel free to tell your friends, neighbors, and we'll be collecting technology to then be refurbished. But as Susan suggested, as always, we appreciate your feedback. BVU has been a great partner with our communications, has been a great partner with our strategic plan at the Community Foundation as well, and really help us to continue to align with our mission of connecting people who care with causes that matter. So your feedback, your notes, your cards, and if you would, take a look at our new website, peoplewhocare.org, and I know Britt would welcome any feedback that you have for us. So how do we best support you and follow you? And we look forward to seeing you in the days and the weeks ahead. So Julie, with that, I'll turn it back to you for some closing remarks about BVU and what's coming up next.
Great. Well, thank you, Cindy. And again, we so appreciate this partnership. And thank you, Susan, for your wise words and practical guidance for us. And as I mentioned, we will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording and the slides and do want your feedback. Just wanted to highlight a couple upcoming BVU events. If you'd like to hear more from Susan, and after today, I think we all agree we certainly would like to. She will be sharing at our Nonprofit Leaders Breakfast coming up in 2 weeks on the topic of navigating your personal and professional brands in these extraordinary times. So kind of an extension of where we started today, and how it all intersects, or how we can protect our brands and manage those expectations. And then we are really excited about our upcoming Nonprofit Leadership Summit series, which is an 8-part webinar series in October and November to help you build a bridge to your nonprofit's future. We'll be doing these webinars on Thursdays for an hour and a half, and we'll be talking with experts in the areas of finance, technology, HR, communications, board governance, strategic planning. It'll be a series that builds on itself over time and helping you figure out how to get to 2021 and beyond, as we're all in these challenging times together. So with that, thanks again to Susan, our partners at Community Foundation of Lorain County, and all of you for being here with us this morning. We wish you, your families, and your organizations the very best. Be well, and thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.